Hey there, beautiful people. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories. I'm your host, Frank Patterson, and if you're new here, well, first of all, welcome to the family. This channel is packed with incredible true stories from real people, and today I've got something really special for you. But before we dive in, I gotta ask, and don't take this the wrong way, but I see here that 96 of you watching this video aren't subscribed to the channel. Come on, folks. It breaks this old heart of mine. If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, it helps the channel grow, and it means the world to me. Also, smash that like button if this story touches your heart, and don't forget to drop a comment telling me what you think. I read every single one. All right, let me introduce myself properly for the newcomers. My name is Frank Patterson. I'm 67 years old, retired from running a small auto repair shop in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I've got 3 kids, 8 grandchildren, and more stories than you could shake a stick at. That's why I started this channel, to share these mind-blowing true stories with all of you amazing people. Today's story is probably the most personal one I've ever told on this channel. It's about love, secrets, and how life can surprise you when you least expect it. This happened back in 1972 when I was just 23 years old and thought I had the world figured out. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the summer that changed my life forever. It was July of 1972, and man, what a time to be alive. The Godfather was playing in theaters, everyone was listening to Neil Young, and I was working 6 days a week at Murphy's Auto Repair on Main Street. Now, Cedar Falls wasn't exactly a bustling metropolis. We had about 8,000 people, 2 traffic lights, and 1 movie theater that showed the same film for 3 weeks straight. I was living in a small apartment above Mrs. Henderson's bakery, driving a beat-up '72 Chevy Nova that I'd fixed up myself, and spending my Friday nights at Rowdy's Bar with my buddies Mike and Tommy. Life was simple, predictable, and honestly a little boring. That all changed on a Tuesday morning in July when this pristine 1975 Ford Mustang convertible rolled into our shop. Candy apple red, white racing stripes, chrome that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. But it wasn't the car that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was the woman driving it. She had long, wavy blonde hair that caught the sunlight, wearing a flowing sundress and these oversized sunglasses that were all the rage back then. She looked like she'd stepped right out of a magazine, definitely not from around Cedar Falls, Iowa. "Excuse me," she said, and her voice had this soft, almost musical quality to it. "I think there's something wrong with my car. It's making this terrible noise." I walked over, trying not to stare, and sure enough, there was a grinding sound coming from the engine. "Sounds like your alternator belt," I said, lifting the hood. "Should be a pretty easy fix. Give me about an hour?" She smiled, and I swear the whole world got a little brighter. "That would be wonderful. Is there somewhere I can wait? Maybe get a cup of coffee?" I pointed her toward Millie's Diner across the street. "Best coffee in town," I said. "Well, only coffee in town, but it's still pretty good." She laughed, this genuine musical laugh that made my heart skip a beat. "I'm Sarah, by the way, Sarah Mitchell." "Joe Patterson," I replied, wiping my greasy hands on my coveralls before shaking hers. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." As she walked across the street, I couldn't help but watch. There was something about her, an elegance, a mystery. She definitely wasn't from Iowa. I fixed her alternator belt in about 45 minutes, but I'll admit, I might have taken a little extra time to make sure everything was perfect. When she came back from the diner, she seemed impressed with how quickly I'd worked. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching for her purse. $12 should cover it," I said. It was probably worth 8, but I figured the extra 4 was worth it for the best hour of my week. She handed me a 20 and said, "Keep the change. You've been very kind." As she was getting ready to leave, I mustered up all the courage I had. Sarah, I hope you don't think I'm being too forward, but would you like to get dinner sometime? There's this great little Italian place on the edge of town. She hesitated for a moment, and I thought for sure she was going to politely decline. But then she smiled and said, I'd like that very much, Frank. How about tomorrow night? My heart practically jumped out of my chest. 7 o'clock work for you? Perfect. Should I meet you there? No way, I said. A gentleman picks up his date. Where are you staying? The Cedar Inn, she replied. Room 218. The Cedar Inn was our town's only hotel, a small, family-run place with about 20 rooms. It was clean and comfortable, but certainly not fancy. I wondered what had brought someone like Sarah to our little corner of Iowa. The next evening, I showed up at the Cedar Inn wearing my best shirt and pants, with my hair slicked back with enough Brill cream to grease a car. I was nervous as hell, but excited too. Sarah answered the door looking absolutely stunning in a simple but elegant blue dress. You look very handsome, Frank, she said, and I felt like I was floating on air. Dinner at Angelo's was magical. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She told me she was from California, Los Angeles, and that she was between chapters in her life. She was vague about the details, but I didn't want to pry. We talked about music. She loved Carole King and the Beatles. Movies, she'd seen Love Story 3 times. And books, she was reading some poet named Sylvia Plath. I told her about growing up in Cedar Falls, about my dreams of maybe opening my own shop someday, about how I'd never been more than 100 miles from home. She listened like every word I said was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard. When I walked her back to the hotel, she surprised me by taking my hand. I had a wonderful time tonight, Frank. Thank you. Would you like to do it again tomorrow? I asked hopefully. I'd love to, she said. But maybe we could do something different. Could you show me around town? I'd love to see Cedar Falls through your eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and I became inseparable. I'd pick her up every morning after work, and we'd explore every inch of Cedar Falls and the surrounding countryside. We went to the old covered bridge on Elm Creek, had picnics by the reservoir, and spent hours talking on the bench outside Hartley Park. She was fascinated by everything, the way the cornfields stretched to the horizon, the Friday night high school football games. Even though it was summer, we went to watch the team practice. The way everyone in town knew everyone else's business. It's so different from Los Angeles, she'd say. There's something beautiful about the simplicity. But there were things about Sarah that didn't quite add up. She always paid for everything in cash, never used a credit card. She didn't have any luggage except for one small suitcase. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd get this distant, almost scared look in her eyes. One evening, we were sitting by the reservoir watching the sunset when I finally worked up the courage to ask, Sarah, can I ask you something personal? She tensed up a little. Of course. Ah, sure. What brought you to Cedar Falls? I mean, no offense to my hometown, but it's not exactly a tourist destination. She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the water. Finally, she said, I needed to get away from some things, Frank. Sometimes you just need to find a place where you can breathe again. I wanted to ask more, but something in her tone told me not to push. Instead, I took her hand and said, Well, I'm glad you found us. I'm glad you found me. She squeezed my hand and smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. Me too, Joe. Me too. By the 3rd week, I was head over heels in love. I'd never felt anything like this before. Sarah was smart, funny, beautiful, and she seemed to genuinely care about me. A small-town mechanic who'd never done anything particularly special with his life. I was starting to think about the future. Maybe she'd stay in Cedar Falls. Maybe I'd ask her to marry me. I even started looking at apartments we could share. bigger places than my little room above the bakery. Then everything changed. It was a Thursday evening, and we were having dinner at Millie's Diner when Sarah suddenly went white as a sheet. She was looking toward the window, and when I turned around, I saw a man in an expensive-looking suit getting out of a black Cadillac. "Sarah?" I said. "What's wrong?" "I have to go," she whispered, standing up so quickly she knocked over her water glass. "I'm so sorry, Joe. I have to go right now." "What's happening? Who is that man?" But she was already heading toward the back exit of the diner. I threw a 20 on the table and followed her, but by the time I got outside, she was already running down the alley behind Main Street. I chased after her, calling her name, but she was fast and had a head start. When I finally caught up with her at the Cedar Inn, she was throwing clothes into her suitcase with shaking hands. "Sarah, please tell me what's going on," I pleaded. "Who was that man? Why are you so scared?" She stopped packing and looked at me, and I could see that she was crying. "Frank, I should have told you from the beginning, but I was selfish. I was so happy here with you that I didn't want to ruin it." "Tell me what?" "I'm married, Joe." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "That man at the diner. That was my husband, Richard. I left him 3 months ago, and I've been running ever since." I sat down heavily on the bed, trying to process what she was telling me. "You're married." "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "Richard is. He's not a good man, Frank. He drinks too much, and when he drinks, he gets angry. Very angry." She showed me her left shoulder, pulling down her dress slightly to reveal a faded bruise that was yellow-green around the edges. This was from the last time. I finally got the courage to leave when he threw a bottle at my head and barely missed. I felt sick to my stomach, but not just because of what she was telling me. I was angry, furious that someone had hurt her, but also hurt that she hadn't trusted me enough to tell me the truth. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I knew you were a good man, Frank, and good men try to fix things. I didn't want you getting involved in this mess. Richard has connections. He's a lawyer. He has friends in the police department. I just wanted to disappear and start over somewhere." "But you can't run forever, Sarah." "I know," she said, sipping up her suitcase, "but I can run tonight." There was a knock at the door. 3 sharp, authoritative raps. We both froze. "Sarah," came a man's voice from the hallway. "Open the door, Sarah. I know you're in there." "Is there another way out?" she whispered. I looked around the room. We were on the 2nd floor, but there was a fire escape outside the window. "This way," I said, opening the window as quietly as I could. The fire escape was old and rusty, and it creaked something fierce as we climbed down. We could hear Richard pounding on the door upstairs, shouting Sarah's name. My Nova was parked behind the hotel. We threw her suitcase in the back, and I gunned it out of there, taking back roads to avoid Main Street. "Where can I take you?" I asked as we drove through the dark countryside. "The Greyhound station in Cedar Rapids," she said. "There's a bus to Chicago at midnight." Cedar Rapids was about an hour away. We drove in silence for most of the trip, both of us trying to process what was happening. Finally, as we were pulling into the bus station parking lot, Sarah turned to me and said, "Frank, I want you to know that these past few weeks have been the happiest of my life. You gave me something I didn't know I was looking for." "What's that?" "Hope. You showed me that there are still good men in this world, that I deserve to be treated with kindness and respect." I parked the car and turned off the engine. "Sarah, come back to me when this is over. However long it takes, a year, 5 years, 10 years. When you're free, come back to Cedar Falls. I'll be here." She kissed me then, soft and desperate and full of all the things we couldn't say. "I love you, Joe Patterson. I wish things could be different." "I love you too," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I watched her board the bus to Chicago, and then I drove home in the dark, feeling like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. The next morning I went to work like nothing had happened. Mike and Tommy asked me what was wrong. I guess I looked pretty rough, but I just said I was coming down with something. For weeks afterward, I expected Richard to show up at the shop, asking questions about Sarah. But he never did. I heard from Mrs. Chen at the front desk of the Cedar Inn that he checked out the next morning without saying much of anything. I waited for Sarah to write, to call, to send some kind of message that she was okay. But there was nothing. Months passed. I tried dating other women, but nobody measured up. How could they? Sarah had shown me what love could feel like, and everything else seemed pale in comparison. Eventually, life moved on. I opened my own shop in 1982, married a nice local girl named Betty in 1985, had 3 beautiful kids. Betty was a good woman, kind, funny, and she made a great pot roast. We had a solid marriage, even if it wasn't the earth-moving, soul-stirring kind of love I'd experienced with Sarah. But I never forgot her. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking at every blonde woman who came into the shop, hoping it might be her. I kept her memory tucked away in a corner of my heart like a precious photograph. 20 years passed. In July of 1992, I was flying to Denver for my nephew's wedding. Betty had stayed home because she was fighting a summer cold. I was sitting in the Chicago O'Hare Airport, waiting for my connecting flight, when I heard someone say my name. Frank? Frank Patterson? I looked up and there she was. Older, of course. We both were. But still beautiful. Her hair was shorter now, with streaks of silver, and she wore it in a sophisticated bob. She was dressed in a business suit and carrying a briefcase. Sarah, I breathed. We stared at each other for a long moment, both of us probably wondering if this was really happening. My God, she said, sitting down in the chair next to mine. What are the odds? Where are you flying to? I asked, still hardly believing she was really there. San Francisco. Business trip. You? Denver. Family wedding. There was an awkward pause. 20 years is a long time. You look good, Frank, she said finally. Happy. So do you. You look successful. She smiled. I am. I'm a real estate agent in Portland now. Have been for about 10 years. Remarried in 1985 to a man named David. He's a pediatrician. We have a good life. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. Even though part of my heart was breaking all over again, I was genuinely happy that she'd found peace and safety. What about you? Married Betty Morrison in 1985. You remember Betty? She worked at the bank. Of course. Betty was lovely. Kids? 3. Tommy's 16, Sarah's 14, and little Mike is 11. She raised an eyebrow. Sarah? I felt my cheeks burning. Well, she reached over and touched my hand. That's sweet, Frank. Really. We talked for another hour while we waited for our flights. She told me about her life in Portland, about her husband, David, about the real estate business. She seemed genuinely happy and settled. But then, as they were calling my flight to Denver, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. Frank, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. What is it? She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was a school picture of a teenage girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like mine. This is Jennifer, Sarah said quietly. She's 18. She's graduating from high school this spring. I stared at the photograph, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah. She's yours, Frank. She's our daughter. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just stared at this picture of a girl who looked like a perfect combination of Sarah and me. When I left Cedar Falls, I didn't know I was pregnant, Sarah continued quickly. I found out about 6 weeks later. I thought about calling you, but Richard was still looking for me, and I didn't want to drag you into that mess. I was scared and alone, and I didn't know what to do. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Because I knew you, Joe. I knew that if you found out you had a daughter, you would have moved heaven and earth to find us, and that might have led Richard right to us. I couldn't take that risk. The loudspeaker was announcing final boarding for my flight to Denver. I have to go, I said, standing up in a daze. Frank, wait. She pressed a piece of paper into my hand. That's my address and phone number in Portland. If you ever want to meet her. She knows about you. I told her everything when she turned 18. She'd like to meet you. I looked down at the paper, then back at Sarah. Does she hate me for not being there? No, Sarah said, tears in her eyes. I made sure she understood that you didn't know. She doesn't hate you, Frank. She's curious about you. She wants to know her father. They called for final boarding again. I have to think about this, I said. I understand, but Joe, don't think too long. She's starting college in the fall. Time goes by faster than you think. I made it onto the plane, but I don't remember anything about the flight to Denver. All I could think about was that photograph, my daughter, a girl I'd never known existed. When I got home from the wedding, I told Betty everything. About Sarah, about Jennifer, about the 20-year secret I'd been keeping. I expected her to be angry, to feel betrayed. But Betty was a better woman than I deserved. You have to meet her, Frank, she said after I'd finished telling the story. She's your daughter. But what about our family? What about the kids? They'll understand. They have a half-sister they've never met. That's not something you can just ignore. It took me 3 months to work up the courage to call. When I finally did, Sarah answered on the second ring. Frank? Hi, Sarah. I'd like to meet her, if she still wants to meet me. She does, more than anything. We arranged for Jennifer to fly to Cedar Falls for a weekend in November. I was more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. When I picked her up at the airport, I recognized her immediately. She had my nose and Sarah's smile, and when she hugged me, it felt like something I'd been missing my whole life had suddenly clicked into place. Hi, Dad, she said, and I started crying right there in the middle of the airport. We spent the entire weekend talking. She was smart, funny, ambitious, everything I could have hoped for in a daughter. She was studying pre-med at Oregon State University and wanted to be a pediatric surgeon like her stepfather. I'm not mad at you, she told me on Sunday morning as we sat in Millie's diner, the same place where her mother and I had shared so many meals 20 years earlier. Mom explained everything. I understand why you couldn't be there. I wish I could have been, I said. I wish I could have been there for your first steps, your first day of school, teaching you to drive. Well, she said with a grin that was pure Sarah, I could always use some driving tips. I'm not very good at parallel parking. That made me laugh, and somehow it made everything okay. Jennifer and I have been in regular contact ever since. She graduated from medical school in 2005 and is now a successful pediatric surgeon in Seattle. She's married to a great guy named Mark, and they have 2 kids, my grandchildren, that I get to see 3 or 4 times a year. She calls me Dad, and her kids call me Grandpa Frank. It's one of the greatest gifts life has ever given me. Sarah and I email occasionally, just friendly updates about Jennifer and the grandkids. She's still married to David, still happy in Portland. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if she'd stayed in Cedar Falls all those years ago, but I try not to dwell on it. We both made the choices we thought were best at the time. Betty passed away in 2018, and losing her was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. But having Jennifer and her family has been a blessing I never expected. Sometimes life surprises you in the most incredible ways. Sometimes the people who matter most come into your life when you least expect it, and sometimes they come back 20 years later with gifts you never knew you had. That summer in 1972 changed everything for me. It taught me what real love feels like, showed me that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do, and gave me a daughter I didn't know existed until she was already grown up. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. Well, folks, that's my story for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it reminds you that love comes in many forms and sometimes takes the long way home. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Remember, 96 of you are watching without subscribing, and that makes this old grandpa pretty sad. Your subscription really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep sharing these mind-blowing stories with all of you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a love that got away? Have you ever been surprised by life in a way you never expected? I love reading your thoughts and stories. Thanks for watching Mind-Blowing Stories, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, life is full of surprises, and love always finds a way. Take care, beautiful people.